The woman in the creek wasn't dead yet, but she was close. Elias Boone saw her pale hand first, fingers curled around a willow root like she'd been holding on for hours. Her dress was soaked through, her belly swollen with child, her breath coming in shallow clouds against the frozen morning air. He knew what bringing her home would cost him. A married woman, abandoned and pregnant, carried into a widower's house. The town would crucify them both. But Elias had buried one woman already. He wasn't about to let another die in the mud while he stood by and did nothing. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll see why sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is simply refuse to walk away. The Wyoming Territory didn't forgive mistakes, and it sure as hell didn't forgive weakness. Elias had learned that the hard way 3 years back when fever took his wife Miriam in less than a week, leaving him with 2 children, a failing ranch, and a silence so thick it felt like drowning. He'd stopped praying after that, stopped asking why, just kept his head down, worked the land, and tried to keep Nora and Benji fed through winters that seemed to last longer every year. That October morning started like any other. The sky was the color of old iron, heavy with the promise of early snow. Elias had ridden out before dawn to check the fence line along the creek, the section that always seemed to need mending after heavy rain. The ground was hard beneath his horse's hooves, frost crunching like broken glass. He almost missed her. It was the flash of blue fabric that caught his eye first, unnatural against the brown and gray of the creek bank. Then he saw her hand, white as bone, gripping that willow root. For half a second, he thought it was a body, some drifter who'd tried to cross the creek in the dark and lost their footing. But then her chest rose, just barely, and he was off his horse before he could think about what it meant. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were dark, almost black, wide with fear and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sound, something between a gasp and a sob. That's when he saw the rest of her. The torn dress, the mud caked in her hair, the bare feet cut and bleeding, and the swell of her belly, unmistakable even through the soaked fabric. Pregnant. Far along too, by the look of it. "Easy now," Elias said, moving closer. The water was barely ankle deep here, but she was halfway in it, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "I'm going to get you out of there." She shook her head violently, trying to pull away from him, and that's when he noticed the bruises. Dark purple fingerprints circled her wrist, a shadow of a handprint on her upper arm. His jaw tightened. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "But you can't stay here. You understand? You'll freeze to death." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then something in her face crumpled, and she let go of the root. Elias caught her before she could collapse completely. She weighed almost nothing despite the pregnancy, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. He lifted her as gently as he could, trying not to jostle her too much, and carried her up the bank to where his horse waited. Getting her onto the saddle was awkward. She was barely conscious, her head lolling against his shoulder, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. Elias ended up mounting first, then pulling her up in front of him, one arm locked around her waist to keep her from sliding off. She made a small sound of protest, but she didn't fight him. The ride back to the ranch took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Elias kept expecting her to pass out completely, or worse, but she held on with a kind of desperate strength that reminded him of wounded animals, the kind that would bite you even as you tried to help them, because they'd forgotten what kindness looked like. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she'd come from or who'd left those bruises on her skin. There would be time for questions later, maybe. Right now, all that mattered was getting her warm and dry. The ranch house came into view just as the first fat snowflakes started to fall. It wasn't much, a weathered 2-story structure with a sagging porch and windows that rattled in the wind, but it was home. Smoke was rising from the chimney, which meant Nora had gotten the fire going. Good. They'd need it. Elias dismounted carefully, then eased the woman down into his arms. She'd gone completely limp now, her head resting against his chest, her breathing so shallow he had to watch her ribcage to be sure she was still alive. The front door swung open before he reached it. "Pa?" Nora stood in the doorway, 10 years old and sharp as a tack, her mother's eyes staring out of her narrow face. Behind her, 6-year-old Benji peered around her skirt. his thumb in his mouth. What happened? Found her by the creek, Elias said shortly. Get some blankets. And heat water as much as you can. She's half frozen. Nora's eyes went wide, taking in the woman's condition. But to her credit, she didn't ask questions. Just nodded and disappeared into the house, already calling out instructions to Benji. Elias carried the woman inside and laid her on the old sofa in the front room, the one Miriam had insisted on buying their first year of marriage, even though they couldn't afford it. The woman's eyes flickered open again as he pulled back, and this time there was something like awareness in them. Where? Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. My ranch. About 5 miles from town. Elias grabbed the blanket Nora had left draped over the back of a chair and spread it over her. You're safe here. Her laugh was bitter, painful to hear. Safe, there's no such thing. Before he could respond, Nora reappeared with an armful of quilts and Benji trailing behind with a kettle of water. Together, they worked in practiced silence. Elias had trained them well after Miriam died, taught them how to handle emergencies without falling apart. Nora helped him strip off the woman's wet dress, while Benji turned his back, cheeks burning red. They wrapped her in dry blankets, piled quilts on top of her, and Elias carefully cleaned the cuts on her feet while Nora held a cup of warm broth to her lips. She drank like someone who hadn't seen water in days, greedy gulps that made her choke and cough. Elias made her slow down, one hand on her shoulder. Easy, he murmured. You'll make yourself sick. This close, he could see more details. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25 at most. Pretty, in a worn-down way, with good bones beneath the bruises and exhaustion. Her hair, once cleaned of mud, would probably be dark brown, maybe with hints of red in the right light. But it was her eyes that held him, dark and fierce and utterly terrified. What's your name? He asked finally. She hesitated so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, Clara Voss. I'm Elias Boone. This is my daughter Nora and my son Benji. Clara's gaze shifted to the children, and something softened in her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. I don't want to be any trouble. You're not trouble, Nora said firmly, in a tone that sounded so much like Miriam it made Elias's chest ache. You're hurt, and you need help. That's different. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. You don't understand. My husband, he'll come looking. He'll... Let him come, Elias said quietly. Right now, you need to rest. Everything else can wait. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Nothing ever waited out here. The frontier had a way of forcing your hand, of making you face things before you were ready. And judging by the fear in Clara's eyes, whatever she was running from wasn't the kind of thing that just went away. She fell asleep quickly after that, exhaustion finally winning out. Elias sat in the chair across from the sofa, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, while Nora and Benji whispered questions he couldn't answer. Is she going to be okay, Pa? Benji asked, his small face pinched with worry. I don't know, son. Where'd she come from? I don't know that either. Can she stay here? Nora asked, and there was something in her voice, hope, maybe, or longing. She'd been so quiet since Miriam died, so careful, like she was afraid that if she asked for anything, it might all fall apart. Elias looked at his daughter, then back at the sleeping woman on the sofa. He thought about the bruises on her wrists, the cuts on her feet, the way she'd flinched when he first reached for her. He thought about the town, about the gossip that would start the moment anyone found out he'd brought a pregnant woman into his home, about the kind of trouble that could bring down on all of them. For now, he said finally. She can stay for now. The first 3 days passed in a blur of fever and delirium. Clara barely woke, and when she did, she was incoherent, crying out for someone named Samuel, begging someone else not to hurt her, sometimes just sobbing quietly into the pillows. Elias did what he could, which wasn't much. He kept her warm, forced water and broth down her throat when she was conscious enough to swallow, and changed the bandages on her feet. Nora helped without being asked, staying up late to sit with Clara when the nightmares got bad, singing soft songs Miriam used to sing when they were scared. Benji brought his wooden animals and lined them up on the floor next to the sofa, a silent offering to whoever this broken stranger was. On the fourth morning, Clara woke up clear-headed for the first time. Elias was in the kitchen, trying to make something resembling breakfast, when he heard her voice from the front room. "Hello?" He found her sitting up, blankets pooled around her waist, looking around the room with wide, uncertain eyes. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly. The bruises were starting to fade to yellow-green, and there was color back in her cheeks. She looked fragile still, but no longer like she was half in the grave. "Morning," Elias said, staying in the doorway. He'd learned not to approach her too quickly. Sudden movements made her panic. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got trampled by a horse," Clara said honestly. Her hand moved to her belly, a protective gesture that seemed unconscious. "The baby, still kicking from what I can tell," Elias said. "You've been here 4 days. Fever broke last night." 4 days. Clara's expression shifted, something like panic flickering across her face. "I need to go. I can't. You don't understand. He'll—" "Your husband," Elias said quietly. "Gideon Voss." She froze. "How did you— You talked in your sleep, said his name more than once." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever he did to you, Clara, I'm not going to let him do it again. Not while you're under my roof." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "You can't stop him. Nobody can. He's—" She stopped, pressing her lips together like she was physically holding the words back. "Tell me," Elias said. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then slowly, the story came out. She'd met Gideon Voss 2 years ago in Missouri, when her father was still alive and their farm was still standing. Gideon had been charming, well-dressed, full of promises about a new life in the territories. Her father had been sick, dying slow from something the doctors couldn't name, and Clara had been desperate for a way out, for someone to lean on. The marriage had been quick. Too quick, she realized later. They'd left Missouri within a week, headed west with nothing but what fit in a wagon. And almost as soon as they crossed into the territories, Gideon had changed. "He wasn't the same man," Clara said quietly, her hands twisted in the blanket. "Or maybe he was always that man, and I was too stupid to see it. He drank, got mean when he drank. And when I got pregnant," she stopped, swallowing hard. "He said it wasn't his, called me a whore, said I'd been with other men. Nothing I said made any difference." The bruises, Elias realized, weren't new. She'd been living with them for months, maybe longer. 3 weeks ago, we had a fight," Clara continued. "A bad one. He said—" Her voice cracked. "He said he was going to make sure I never saw the baby once it was born, that he'd take it away the moment I delivered, give it to someone else. Said I wasn't fit to be a mother." "Jesus," Elias breathed. "I ran that night, took what I could carry, and just ran. I don't even know where I was trying to go. I just knew I couldn't stay." She looked up at him, and her eyes were hollow. "I've been walking for weeks, sleeping in barns when I could find them, under trees when I couldn't. I ran out of food 5 days ago, and then—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Then I ended up in your creek." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Elias thought about Miriam, about the promises he'd made when she died, to protect their children, to build a good life for them, to stay out of trouble. Bringing Clara into his home violated every bit of sense he had left. The town would talk. Hell, they were probably already talking. A widower bringing a pregnant married woman into his house? It would be a scandal that followed them for years. But when he looked at Clara, exhausted and terrified and trying so hard to be brave, he couldn't bring himself to care about any of that. "You can stay," he said finally. "As long as you need to." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Why? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "No," Elias agreed. "But you need help, and I have a house with empty rooms. That's reason enough." She cried then, quietly, her shoulders shaking. Elias left her to it, gave her the dignity of privacy. He went back to the kitchen and stared at the half-cooked eggs in the pan, trying to figure out what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Nora appeared at his elbow, silent as a ghost. "She's staying?" his daughter asked. "For now." "Good." Nora grabbed a plate and started dishing out eggs with the confidence of someone twice her age. "She needs us, Pa, and maybe—" She stopped, biting her lip. "Maybe what?" "Maybe we need her too. The first time Clara tried to stand on her own, she made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. Elias caught her before she hit the floor, and she swore with language that made Benji's eyes go wide. "Sorry," she muttered, red-faced. "I didn't mean—" "I've heard worse," Elias said dryly. "But maybe we should take it slower." "I need to be able to walk," Clara insisted. "I can't just lie around being useless." "You're not useless. You're recovering." But Clara was stubborn in a way that reminded Elias of Miriam. Once she'd set her mind to something, there was no talking her out of it. Over the next week, she pushed herself relentlessly, forcing her battered body to move even when it was clear every step hurt. She progressed from the sofa to the chair by the window, then from the chair to the kitchen table, and finally, 10 days after Elias found her, she made it all the way out to the porch. It wasn't much of a victory. She was shaking and pale by the time she lowered herself into the old rocking chair, but the look on her face was pure triumph. "Told you," she said breathlessly. Elias handed her a cup of water and didn't mention that her hands were trembling so hard she nearly spilled it. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep pushing this hard." "I've been hurt before. I survived." There wasn't much he could say to that. As Clara grew stronger, she started finding ways to make herself useful. Small things at first, folding laundry, mending torn shirts, helping Nora with the dishes. Then bigger things. She noticed the broken step on the back porch and spent an afternoon hammering it back into place, ignoring Elias's protest that he'd get to it eventually. She patched the holes in Benji's trousers and hemmed Nora's dress that had been dragging in the dirt for months. "You don't have to do all this," Elias told her one evening, watching her scrub mud off the kitchen floor with fierce determination. "I know," Clara said without looking up. "But I want to. I need to. I can't just—" She stopped, sitting back on her heels. "I've spent the last 2 years being told I'm worthless, that I can't do anything right. I need to prove that's not true, even if it's just to myself." Elias understood that. He'd felt the same way after Miriam died, like he needed to work himself to exhaustion just to prove he could still function, still take care of his kids, still be worth something. "You're not worthless," he said quietly. Clara looked up at him, and for the first time, something like a smile crossed her face. It didn't last long, but it was there. "Thanks." The children took to her with an ease that surprised Elias. Benji, who'd been shy and clingy since losing his mother, started following Clara around like a puppy, chattering about his wooden animals and the bugs he found in the garden. Nora, more cautious by nature, warmed to her slowly. But Elias caught them one afternoon sitting together on the porch, Nora's head on Clara's shoulder, both of them watching the sunset in comfortable silence. It was good. Better than good. For the first time in 3 years, the house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. But Elias knew it couldn't last. The trouble started, as trouble usually did, with a visit to town. Elias had put it off as long as he could, but they needed supplies: flour, salt, coffee, nails for the fence repair. He'd left Clara at the house with strict instructions to rest, taken Nora and Benji with him, and ridden into town trying not to think about what people might say. He should have known better. The general store went quiet the moment he walked in. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward him, calculating and cold. Elias ignored them, grabbed what he needed, and headed for the counter where old Samuel Pritchard was waiting with his account book. "Heard you got yourself some company out at your place," Pritchard said, his voice carefully neutral. Word traveled fast. Elias should have expected that too. "Just helping someone who needed it," he said evenly. "That someone being a married woman?" This from Martha Hayes, the postmaster's wife, her voice dripping with disapproval. A pregnant, married woman? The store was dead silent now. Everyone was listening. "She needed help," Elias repeated. "I gave it. That's all there is to it." "That's not all there is to it, and you know it," Martha said. "What you're doing is shameful, Elias Boone. Bringing a woman like that into your home, with your children there?" "A woman like what?" Elias's voice had gone hard. "A woman who was left to die in the cold? A woman who'd been beaten and abandoned? What exactly makes her shameful, Martha?" Martha's face flushed red. "Her husband has been through here looking for her. Says she ran off, says she's not right in the head, says—" "I don't care what he says," Elias interrupted. "I saw the bruises with my own eyes. I know what that man did to her." "You don't know anything," a new voice said. Elias turned to find Thomas Wade, the sheriff, standing in the doorway. He was a big man, running to fat now, but still intimidating when he wanted to be. You're taking the word of a hysterical woman over her lawful husband. That's not how things work out here. The law doesn't give a man the right to beat his wife half to death, Elias said. The law says a man has authority over his household, Wade replied. What happens between a husband and wife is their business, not yours. And harboring another man's wife, especially in her condition, that's going to bring trouble down on you, Boone. I suggest you send her back where she belongs before things get ugly. Elias felt Nora's hand slip into his, small and cold. He looked down at his daughter's frightened face, then back at the sheriff. She stays, he said quietly, until she's well enough to decide for herself what she wants to do. And if Gideon Voss has a problem with that, he can come talk to me about it. Wade's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. Won't be the first time. The ride home was silent. Nora sat in front of Elias on the saddle, stiff and quiet, while Benji dozed against his back. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if Elias hadn't been too angry to notice. He'd made an enemy today, maybe several. The frontier didn't forgive men who went against the grain, who protected women they shouldn't, who challenged the natural order of things. And Clara, she'd have no protectors now except him. The whole town would see her as something shameful, something to be whispered about and judged. But when they got home and Clara met them at the door, asking if everything went all right with worry in her eyes, Elias realized he didn't regret it. Fine, he lied. Everything's fine. But Clara didn't believe him. He could see it in her face, but she didn't push, just helped him unload the supplies while Nora and Benji disappeared to their rooms, and when it was just the two of them in the kitchen, she spoke quietly. They know I'm here. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Elias admitted. They know. I should go. Clara's hands were twisted in her apron, her knuckles white. I'm bringing trouble to your family. I never should have. You're not going anywhere, Elias said firmly. Not until you're ready. Not until the baby comes. And maybe not even then, if you don't want to. Clara stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to me? It was a fair question. Elias wasn't sure he had a good answer. Because someone should, he said finally. Because you deserve better than what you've been given. And because... He stopped, searching for the right words. Because Miriam would have done the same thing. She never could stand by and watch someone suffer. Said it wasn't right, wasn't human. I guess some of that rubbed off on me. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't deserve your kindness. Maybe not, Elias said. But you're getting it anyway. She cried then, properly this time, and Elias stood there awkwardly until she'd cried herself out. When she finally pulled away, wiping her eyes on her sleeve, she looked embarrassed. Sorry, she muttered. Don't be. You're entitled. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had gone quiet, Elias stood on the porch and looked out at the dark shapes of the mountains against the starlit sky. He thought about what Martha Hayes had said, about shame and propriety and doing the right thing according to people who'd never had to make a choice like this. Somewhere out there, Gideon Voss was looking for his wife. And when he found her, because men like that always did, Elias was going to have to figure out how to protect a woman who didn't belong to him, with nothing but his word and his will standing between her and a man who had the law on his side. It was a fight he couldn't win. Not fairly, anyway. But Elias had never been much good at backing down from a fight, even when he should, especially when he shouldn't. Inside the house, he heard Clara moving around, probably unable to sleep. He heard the soft creak of the rocking chair, the quiet sound of her humming something low and sad. And he made himself a promise, there in the dark. Whatever came next, he wouldn't let her face it alone, even if it cost him everything. The first snow came early that year, 2 weeks after Elias's trip to town. It fell soft and silent through the night, and by morning the ranch was buried under 6 inches of white that turned the world into something clean and unfamiliar. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching it, one hand pressed against the cold glass, the other resting on her belly where the baby had been kicking since dawn. Beautiful, isn't it? Nora said, appearing at her elbow with a cup of tea. Terrifying, Clara corrected, taking the cup gratefully. I've never seen this much snow before. In Missouri, we got flurries, maybe an inch or two, But this is nothing, Nora said, with the confidence of someone who'd lived through frontier winters. Wait until January. Pa says last year it got so deep the horses couldn't get through. We were snowed in for almost 3 weeks. Clara's stomach twisted. 3 weeks trapped in a house with a man she barely knew, unable to run if Gideon came, unable to escape if... She forced the thought away. Gideon hadn't come yet. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble of tracking down. But she didn't believe that. Men like Gideon didn't let go of things they considered theirs. Elias came in from the barn a few minutes later, stamping snow off his boots and shaking it from his hat. His face was red from the cold, his breath still misting in the air. "Storm's settling in," he announced. "I checked the animals. We've got enough hay to last a week, maybe more if we're careful, but we need to bring in more firewood before it gets worse." "I can help," Clara said immediately. Elias gave her a look. "You're 7 months pregnant and you can barely walk across the room without getting winded. You're not hauling firewood. I can stack it once you bring it in. I can do something." There was an edge to her voice, something desperate. She needed to be useful, needed to prove she wasn't just dead weight. Elias seemed to understand that. "Fine," he said. "But you work inside where it's warm, and if you start feeling tired, you stop. No arguments." Clara nodded, relief washing through her. They spent the morning in a rhythm that was starting to feel familiar. Elias and Nora hauled wood from the shed, while Benji ran between them carrying smaller pieces, his cheeks pink with cold and excitement. Clara stayed by the back door, stacking everything they brought in with methodical precision. Her back ached, and her feet were swollen, but she kept going, finding something almost meditative in the repetitive motion. By noon, they had enough wood stacked to last through whatever the storm brought. Clara was exhausted, her hands raw and her lower back screaming, but she felt good, accomplished, like she'd actually contributed something. "You did well," Elias said, finding her later sitting at the kitchen table with her feet propped up on a chair. "I stacked wood," Clara said dryly. "Not exactly heroic. Out here, everything that keeps you alive is heroic." He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "How are you feeling?" "Really?" Clara considered lying, then decided against it. "Tired, sore, scared. Of the storm? Of everything." She wrapped her hands around her teacup, seeking its warmth. "Of Gideon finding me. Of the baby coming. Of what happens after. I don't..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't know how to do this. Any of this." Elias was quiet for a moment. "You know what Miriam told me when Nora was born? She said there's no such thing as knowing how to be a parent. You just do it, day by day, and hope you don't mess it up too badly." "That's not very reassuring." "No," he agreed. "But it's honest. And I figure if I could muddle through raising 2 kids without completely destroying them, you can probably manage one." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Probably? Definitely," Elias amended. "You're tougher than you think you are, Clara. Anyone who could survive what you've been through and still get up every morning ready to fight, that's not weakness. That's steel." The words settled into Clara's chest, warm and unexpected. She'd spent so long being told she was nothing, worthless, broken. Hearing someone say the opposite felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias just nodded and went back to his coffee, like he hadn't just said the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. The storm lasted 3 days. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and the temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. They kept the fire going constantly, burning through wood faster than Elias would have liked, but unable to risk letting it die. The children huddled close to the hearth, playing quiet games and reading from the 2 books they owned. Clara mended clothes and tried not to think about what would happen when the snow melted and the roads became passable again. On the second night, Benji had a nightmare. Clara heard him crying from her small room off the kitchen and went to him before she could think about whether it was her place. She found him tangled in his blankets, sobbing into his pillow, while Nora tried uselessly to comfort him. "Hey," Clara said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Hey, it's okay. You're okay." Benji threw himself at her, wrapping his small arms around her neck. "I dreamed about Mama," he choked out. "She was leaving again and I couldn't stop her." Clara's heart broke. She held him close, rocking slightly, murmuring nonsense comfort while he cried himself out. When his sobs finally quieted to hiccups, she eased him back down and pulled the blankets up to his chin. "Your mama loved you very much," she said quietly. "I didn't know her, but I know that's true, and I bet she's watching over you right now, making sure you're safe." "Do you really think so?" Benji asked, his eyes red and swollen. Clara thought about her own mother, dead these 5 years, and the certainty she'd felt sometimes that she wasn't completely alone. "Yeah," she said, "I really do." She stayed until he fell back asleep, then returned to find Elias standing in the hallway. He'd clearly heard everything. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know, but I wanted to." Clara hesitated. "He misses her. They both do. I can't replace her. I wouldn't try. But maybe I can. I don't know. Help a little." Elias's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "You already are." Something passed between them then, something warm and complicated that Clara didn't have words for. Then Elias cleared his throat and stepped back. "You should get some sleep," he said. "Morning comes early." Clara nodded and retreated to her room, but sleep was a long time coming. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, the world outside was transformed. Snow covered everything in smooth white drifts that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. It was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Beautiful because it hit all the rough edges of frontier life. Treacherous because it made travel nearly impossible. Elias spent the morning digging out paths to the barn and the well, his breath coming in heavy clouds. Clara watched from the window, noting the way he moved, careful and deliberate despite the cold. He was a good man, she thought, steady. The kind of man who kept his promises and didn't flinch from hard work. The kind of man Gideon had pretended to be. The thought sent ice through her veins. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby shift and settle. In another 2 months, maybe less, this child would be born. And then what? She couldn't stay here forever, imposing on Elias's kindness. But she had nowhere else to go, no money, no family, just a baby, and a past that kept threatening to drag her back down. "You're thinking too hard," Nora observed, joining her at the window. "I can practically hear it from across the room." Clara managed a weak smile. "Just worrying. It's what I do best." "Pa says worrying is like a rocking chair. Gives you something to do, but doesn't get you anywhere. Your pa's pretty smart. He has his moments." Nora was quiet for a beat. "Are you going to leave when the baby comes?" The question caught Clara off guard. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead." "I hope you don't," Nora said simply. "It's been nice having you here. The house feels more like a home again. And Benji, he hasn't had nightmares like that in months. Not until you came and made him feel safe enough to remember." Clara looked at the girl, this serious 10-year-old who carried too much weight on her narrow shoulders. That's a heavy thing to say. "It's true, though. We were all just existing, going through the motions, but you made us remember what it's like to actually live." Nora turned to face her fully. "So I hope you stay. Even if it's complicated, even if people talk." "People are already talking," Clara said quietly. "Let them. They don't matter." If only it were that simple. A week after the storm, the first visitor came. Clara was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her hand stilled instantly, her heart jumping into her throat. She moved to the window, peering out carefully, and felt her blood turn to ice. The man dismounting in the yard wasn't Gideon, but he might as well have been. He wore a sheriff's badge pinned to his coat, and his face was set in hard, official lines. Thomas Wade had come calling. Elias met him outside. Clara couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could read their body language well enough. Wade was talking, gesturing. Elias stood with his arms crossed, his posture rigid. This wasn't a friendly visit. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Wade climbed back on his horse and rode away. Elias stood in the yard watching him go, his jaw tight with anger. When he finally came inside, Clara was waiting. "What did he want?" she asked, though she already knew. "He brought a message." Elias's voice was carefully controlled. "From your husband. Gideon's filed papers claiming you abandoned him. He's demanding you return home." Clara's legs went weak. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "What kind of papers?" "Legal ones. Claims you're unstable, that you ran away without cause. He's asking the court to compel your return. Elias paused. Wade says if you don't go back willingly, they'll have grounds to come get you by force. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. No, I can't. If I go back, you're not going back, Elias said firmly. I told Wade that. But Clara, you need to understand what we're up against here. The law's on his side. He's your legal husband. Unless we can prove he's unfit or dangerous. The bruises weren't proof enough? Claire's voice was rising, edging toward panic. The fact that I was half dead when you found me? Bruises fade, and you never saw a doctor, never filed a complaint. It's his word against yours, and out here, a man's word carries a lot more weight. Elias ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's how things are. Clara sank into a chair, her mind racing. She'd been a fool to think she could just hide here forever, that Gideon would give up and move on. Men like him never gave up. They pursued and punished and made sure you paid for daring to leave. There has to be something we can do, she said desperately. Some way to fight this. There is. But you're not going to like it. Clara looked up at him. What? Elias hesitated, like he was choosing his words carefully. There's a lawyer in a town about 2 days' ride from here. Name's Margaret Finch. She's got a reputation for taking on cases most lawyers won't touch. Women trying to leave bad marriages, property disputes where the landowners don't have proper papers. Wade mentioned her, said some of the women in town have been talking about her. He paused. If anyone can find a legal way to protect you, it's her. But getting to her means leaving the ranch, being out in the open where Gideon or Wade could find us. You mean find me? I mean us. You think I'm letting you ride out there alone? The simple certainty in his voice made Clara's throat tight. This isn't your fight, Elias. The hell it isn't. The moment I pulled you out of that creek, it became my fight. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Look, I know what people are saying. That I'm harboring another man's wife. That there's something improper going on. Let them talk. But if we don't do something now before that baby comes, Gideon's going to have all the legal standing he needs to take your child away from you. And I'm not going to stand by and let that happen. Clara stared at him, this man who'd shown her more kindness in a few weeks than her own husband had in 2 years. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much? Elias was quiet for a long moment. When Miriam died, I felt helpless. Couldn't stop it, couldn't fix it, couldn't do a damn thing but watch her slip away. I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. He met her eyes. I can't bring Miriam back, but I can help you. And maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm doing this as much for me as for you. But either way, I'm not walking away from this. Clara felt tears building and blinked them back fiercely. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning, if you're up to it. The road should be clear enough. We'll take the wagon, make it easier on you. He stood. I'll talk to the Hendersons about watching Nora and Benji. They're good people. They'll keep them safe. Elias. Clara waited until he looked at her. Thank you. For everything. He just nodded and left her alone with her thoughts. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind rattle the windows and thought about the journey ahead. 2 days on the road, exposed and vulnerable. 2 days where Gideon could find her, where Wade could intercept them, where any number of things could go wrong. And even if they made it to this lawyer, there was no guarantee she could help. No guarantee that anything Clara did would be enough to protect her child. But it was a chance. The only one she had. She thought about the baby moving inside her, strong kicks that sometimes took her breath away. This child deserved better than what Clara had been given, deserved a mother who would fight for them, who wouldn't just accept whatever scraps of safety she was offered. Deserved a life free from the shadow of a man who saw them as property instead of people. Clara pressed both hands to her belly and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however hard the fight, she would not let Gideon take this baby. She would not let her child grow up the way she had, afraid, controlled, told they were worthless. She would burn the whole world down first. The Hendersons arrived just after dawn, their wagon rattling up the frozen road. They were an older couple, weathered and kind, who'd known Elias since before Miriam died. Mrs. Henderson took one look at Clara and pulled her into a fierce hug that smelled like flower and lavender. "You poor dear," she murmured. "We heard what happened. What that man did. You're doing the right thing, fighting back. Mr. Henderson shook Elias's hand. We'll keep the young ones safe. Don't you worry about that. Just focus on getting this sorted. Nora and Benji took the news of their temporary departure with surprising calm. Nora hugged Clara tight and whispered, "Be careful." Benji made her promise to come back, his small face serious. "I promise," Clara said, and meant it. The wagon was loaded with supplies, blankets, food, water, and a rifle that Elias checked twice before securing it within easy reach. Clara climbed up onto the bench seat, moving awkwardly with her belly in the way. Elias settled beside her and took up the reins. "Ready?" he asked. Clara looked back at the ranch house, at the children waving from the porch, at the small piece of safety she'd found in this harsh country. Then she looked ahead, toward the unknown road and whatever waited at the end of it. "Ready?" she said. The first day of travel was harder than Clara had anticipated. The wagon jolted over every rut and frozen puddle, sending sharp pains through her back and hips. The cold seeped through her layers of clothing, making her fingers numb even wrapped in gloves. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and give Clara a chance to walk, to stretch muscles that screamed in protest. Elias didn't complain about the pace, just kept them moving steadily forward. He'd plotted a route that avoided the main roads, keeping them to smaller trails where they'd be less likely to encounter Wade or anyone else looking for them. It meant slower going, but it also meant relative safety. They made camp that first night in a stand of pine trees that offered some protection from the wind. Elias built a fire while Clara huddled under blankets in the wagon, trying to will warmth back into her bones. When he finally had coffee boiling and salt pork sizzling in a pan, he brought her a tin plate and cup. "Eat," he ordered. "You need your strength." Clara obeyed, too tired to argue. The food was simple but good, hot enough to drive away some of the chill. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them, and Clara found herself studying Elias in the flickering light. He looked older out here, away from the ranch, more worn, like the weight of responsibility was visible on his shoulders. "Tell me about Miriam," she said impulsively. Elias looked up, surprised. "What do you want to know?" "Anything, everything. The children talk about her sometimes, but I can tell they're being careful, like they don't want to make me feel like I'm trying to replace her." "You're not," Elias said quietly. "Nobody could replace Miriam. She was—" He stopped, searching for words. "She was fierce. That's the best way to describe her. When she loved something, she loved it completely. When she fought for something, she didn't stop until she'd won. The ranch was barely standing when we got married. Just a broken-down house and some scraggly land. But Miriam looked at it and saw potential. Spent 5 years turning it into something real. She sounds remarkable." She was, and stubborn as hell. When she got sick, she refused to stay in bed until she physically couldn't stand anymore. Kept trying to do everything herself, like if she just worked hard enough she could beat the fever through sheer force of will. His voice went rough. It didn't work. Nothing worked. And I had to stand there and watch her die knowing there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Clara heard the old pain in his words, still raw, even after 3 years. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "So am I." Elias poked at the fire with a stick. "But life doesn't stop just because you're grieving. I had 2 kids who needed raising and a ranch that would fall apart if I didn't keep working. So I did. Got up every morning, did what needed doing, and tried not to think about how empty the house felt. Until I showed up and filled it with different problems." "Different?" Elias agreed. "But not worse. Maybe even better, in some ways. The kids are happier. The house feels lived in again. And I—" He stopped, looking uncomfortable. "And you what?" "I feel useful again. Like I'm doing something that matters instead of just going through the motions." He met her eyes. "So thank you for that." Clara didn't know what to say. The gratitude felt backward, wrong. She was the one who should be thanking him, not the other way around. But looking at Elias across the fire, she understood what he meant. They'd both been drowning in their own ways before finding each other. Maybe pulling someone else out of the water was the only way to save yourself. "We should sleep," Elias said finally. "Long day tomorrow." He banked the fire and settled down on his bedroll on the opposite side of the wagon. Clara lay in the wagon bed, wrapped in every blanket they'd brought, and listened to his breathing slow and deepen. The baby was active tonight, rolling and kicking like they could sense their mother's anxiety. Clara pressed a hand to her belly and whispered promises she hoped she could keep. The second day started with frost thick enough to crack under their boots and a sky so clear it hurt to look at. They were back on the road before the sun fully rose, Elias pushing the pace harder now. They were getting close to the town where the lawyer practiced, close enough that the risk of running into trouble was increasing. Around midday, they crested a hill, and Elias pulled the wagon to a stop. In the distance, Clara could see buildings clustered along a river, the town. "Almost there," Elias said. But before Clara could respond, she heard it, the sound of horses approaching fast from behind. She turned, her heart in her throat, and saw 3 riders coming up the road. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider's posture, the way he sat his horse. Gideon. "Elias," she breathed. He'd already seen them. His hand moved to the rifle. "Get down in the wagon. Cover yourself with blankets. Don't make a sound. He'll know I'm here. Do it, now!" Clara scrambled into the wagon bed, pulling blankets over herself with shaking hands. Through a gap in the fabric, she could see Elias sitting rigid on the bench, the rifle across his lap, as the 3 riders closed in. They surrounded the wagon, boxing it in. Gideon dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving Elias. He was exactly as Clara remembered, tall, hard-faced, with eyes like chips of ice. The 2 men with him were strangers, but they wore the casual violence of hired muscle. "Elias Boone," Gideon said, his voice smooth and cold. "I've been looking for you." "Have you now?" Elias said flatly. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. A woman. My wife. I've been told she's been staying at your ranch." "Don't know what you're talking about." Gideon smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Let's not play games. Sheriff Wade told me all about your little arrangement, harboring a fugitive wife, very noble of you, but the law's clear on this matter. Clara is my legal property, and I want her back." "She's not property," Elias said, his voice hard as iron. "She's a person, and even if she was here, which I'm not saying she is, I wouldn't hand her over to a man who beats women." One of the hired men moved his hand toward his gun. Elias's rifle came up in a smooth motion, aimed directly at Gideon's chest. "I wouldn't," Elias said quietly. The clearing went very still. Gideon raised a hand, stopping his men. His smile widened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. All I want is my wife. Give her to me, and we'll ride away. No trouble, no violence. You can go back to your quiet little life. And if I don't, then I'll file charges, kidnapping, adultery, interference with a legal marriage. You'll lose your ranch, your children, everything. Is one broken woman really worth all that?" Under the blankets, Clara was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She wanted to stand up, to tell Elias to just let her go, that he'd done enough. But she also knew what would happen if she went back to Gideon. She'd seen it in his eyes too many times, that cold calculation, that absolute certainty that she belonged to him. "She stays with me," Elias said, "until a court says otherwise." Gideon's expression darkened. "You're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool with a rifle pointed at your chest. So I suggest you and your friends turn around and ride back the way you came." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Gideon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "This isn't over, Boone. Not by a long shot. I'll see you in court. And when I win, and I will win, I'm going to make sure you pay for every day you kept my wife from me." He swung back onto his horse. The 3 riders wheeled around and galloped back down the road, leaving nothing but dust and threat hanging in the air. Elias didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Then he let out a breath that shook. "Clara," he said, "you can come out now." She emerged from the blankets, pale and trembling. "I'm sorry. You should have stayed hidden, which you did. That's all that matters." He set the rifle aside and took up the reins again. "We need to get to that lawyer, now, before Gideon decides to come back with more men." They covered the last few miles to town at a pace that made the wagon rattle and Clara's teeth ache. But they made it, rolling into the main street just as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. The lawyer's office was a small building squeezed between a dry goods store and a boarding house. A sign hung above the door. "Margaret Finch, attorney at law." Elias helped Clara down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow. Together they climbed the steps and pushed open the door. Inside, A woman looked up from a desk piled high with papers. She was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that took in everything at once. Clara's condition, Elias's protective stance, the desperation written across both their faces. "Let me guess," Margaret Finch said dryly. "Trouble with a husband who won't let go." Clara nodded, unable to speak. The lawyer stood, coming around the desk. "Well, you've come to the right place. Sit down and tell me everything. And I do mean everything. If I'm going to help you, I need to know exactly what we're fighting against." So Clara sat, with Elias beside her, and finally, told someone the whole truth. Margaret Finch listened without interrupting, her pen moving across paper in quick, precise strokes. She didn't flinch when Clara described the beatings, didn't look away when the words became harder to say. She just wrote, her face impassive, absorbing every detail like she'd heard 1,000 similar stories and knew exactly how bad they could get. When Clara finally finished, her voice hoarse and her hands shaking, Margaret set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "First thing you need to understand," the lawyer said, "is that the law wasn't written with women like you in mind. It was written by men who believe a wife is her husband's property, same as his horse or his land. That's what we're up against." "So there's nothing we can do?" Clara's voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't say that." Margaret's eyes were hard as flint. "I said that's what we're up against. But the law has cracks in it, same as anything built by imperfect people. We just need to find them and wedge them open." She tapped her notes. "The bruises you described, did anyone else see them? Anyone who could testify?" "I did," Elias said immediately. "The day I found her. Her wrists, her arms, her face, all of it." Margaret nodded. "That's something. Not enough on its own, but something. What about witnesses to the abuse itself? Anyone who saw Gideon Voss strike you?" Clara thought back through 2 years of carefully hidden violence, of making excuses and covering bruises and pretending everything was fine. "No, he was always careful. Only hit me where it wouldn't show, or when we were alone." "Smart," Margaret said grimly. "Men like him usually are. What about the abandonment? He's claiming you ran away without cause. We need to prove you had cause. Did you ever tell anyone what was happening? Write it down anywhere?" "I wrote letters," Clara said slowly. "To my sister in Missouri. I told her some of it, not everything, but enough that she knew things were bad. But I don't know if she kept them." "We'll need to find out. Letters are evidence, especially if they're dated and describe specific incidents." Margaret made another note. "What about the pregnancy? Did Gideon ever threaten the baby directly? He said he'd take it away from me the moment I gave birth. Said I wasn't fit to be a mother, that he'd find someone else to raise it." Clara's hands moved to her belly protectively. "That's when I ran. I wouldn't let him do that. That threat, if we can prove he made it, could work in our favor. The courts generally don't like it when a father threatens to separate a mother from her newborn without cause." Margaret paused. "But proving it means getting someone to testify to hearing him say it, which I'm guessing we don't have." "No," Clara admitted. "We were alone." Margaret drummed her fingers on the desk, thinking. "Here's what I can do. I can file a counterclaim arguing that you left the marriage due to fear for your safety and the safety of your unborn child. We'll cite the bruises Mr. Boone witnessed, the physical evidence of abuse, and your reasonable belief that returning would put both you and the baby in danger. It's not a guarantee, but it might buy us time." "How much time?" Elias asked. "Depends on the judge. Could be weeks, could be months. But here's the problem. Even if we win that argument, Clara is still legally married to Gideon Voss, which means he still has certain rights, including the right to his child." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that even in the best-case scenario, where we prove abuse and get you legal separation, Gideon could still petition for custody. And in the eyes of the law, a father's claim to his child is usually stronger than a mother's, especially if that mother can be painted as unstable or morally questionable." "She's not either of those things," Elias said sharply. "I know that. You know that. But what matters is what a judge will believe. And Gideon Voss is already building a narrative. Unstable wife, ran away without cause, living with another man in questionable circumstances." Margaret looked at Clara directly. "I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it so you understand what we're really fighting. This isn't just about leaving a bad marriage. This is about keeping your child. And that's going to require more than just proving Gideon hurt you. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. Clara gripped the arms of her chair to keep from swaying. Then what do we do? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said carefully, "There is one option. It's drastic, and it's not without risk, but it would effectively cut Gideon's legal standing out from under him." "What option?" Elias asked. "Clara could remarry before the baby is born." Margaret held up a hand before either of them could speak. "I know how that sounds, but hear me out. If Clara were to divorce Gideon on grounds of abuse and immediately marry someone else, someone who could provide for her and the child, someone of good standing in the community, it would significantly strengthen her position. The courts are less likely to separate a child from a stable, two-parent household than from a single mother with no means of support." Clara stared at her. "You're talking about getting divorced and remarried in the space of a few weeks. Is that even legal? In this territory? If we can get a judge to grant an emergency divorce based on abuse and abandonment, yes. It's unusual, but it's been done before. The key is finding someone willing to marry you quickly, someone the court will view as a legitimate husband and father figure." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's mind was racing, trying to process what Margaret was suggesting. It made a horrible kind of sense. Marrying someone else would give her and the baby protection, legal standing, a name that wasn't tied to Gideon Voss. But who would agree to something like that? What man would willingly take on a pregnant woman and all the trouble that came with her? She turned to look at Elias and found him already looking at her. "I'll do it," he said quietly. Claire's breath caught. "What?" "I'll marry you. If that's what it takes to keep you and the baby safe, I'll do it." "Elias, you can't. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." His voice was steady, certain in a way that made Clara's chest ache. "You need protection, and I can provide it. The kids already love you, the ranch is established, and I've got standing in the community. At least, I did, before all this started. It makes sense." "It makes you look like you were having an affair with me," Clara said desperately. "It confirms everything people are already saying. Let them say it. I stopped caring about gossip the day I pulled you out of that creek." Elias leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Clara, listen to me. This isn't charity, and it's not pity. You've been part of my family from the moment you walked into my house. Making it legal just puts it on paper." Margaret cleared her throat. "I'll need to make something clear. If you do this, Mr. Boone, you're taking on significant responsibility, not just for Clara, but for her child. In the eyes of the law, you would be that baby's father. You'd be financially responsible, legally bound, and if things don't work out between you and Clara down the road, you could be on the hook for support payments, property division, all of it." "I understand," Elias said without hesitation. "And you, Clara." Margaret's gaze shifted. "You need to understand what you'd be agreeing to as well. Marriage, even one entered into for practical reasons, is a binding legal contract. You'd be trading one husband for another. If Mr. Boone here turns out to be different than he seems, you'd have very limited recourse." Clara looked at Elias, really looked at him. At the man who'd saved her life, who'd protected her when he had every reason not to, who'd faced down Gideon Voss with a rifle to keep her safe. She thought about the way he was with his children, patient and kind and steady. The way he'd never once made her feel like she owed him anything, never demanded gratitude or payment for his help. She knew what Margaret was warning her about. She'd made this mistake before, trusted the wrong man, believed promises that turned out to be lies. But Elias wasn't Gideon. She knew that in her bones, in the marrow-deep certainty that came from watching someone's actions match their words day after day. "I trust him," Clara said simply. "If he's willing to do this, then yes, I'll marry him." Margaret studied them both for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right. Here's what happens next. I'll file for an emergency divorce from Gideon Voss, citing abuse, abandonment, and fear for the safety of you and your unborn child. We'll need witness statements from Mr. Boone about the condition you were in when he found you. We'll also need any documentation we can get, letters, anything that proves Gideon's violence or threats." "How long will the divorce take?" Clara asked. "If we get lucky with the judge, a week, maybe 2. But here's the catch. Gideon will fight it. He'll claim you're lying about the abuse, that you ran away because you were having an affair with Mr. Boone. He'll do everything he can to paint you as the villain and himself as the wronged husband. Let him try, Elias said grimly. The other issue is timing. We need to get you divorced and remarried before that baby is born. Once the child arrives, Gideon's claim as the biological father becomes much stronger. But if you're already married to someone else when the baby comes, with divorce papers filed and processed, it muddies the legal waters enough that we might be able to keep him from claiming paternity. Clara did the math in her head. She was 7 months along, maybe a bit more. That gave them at most 2 months, probably less. Can we do it that fast? We'll have to. Margaret stood and began gathering papers. I'll start the filing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, you two need to decide how you want to handle this. The marriage itself needs to happen quickly once the divorce is granted, and it needs to be documented properly. Public ceremony, witnesses, the whole thing. We can't give Gideon any room to claim it's not legitimate. What about Gideon himself? Clara asked. He's not going to just sit back and let this happen. No, he's not. Which is why you need to stay somewhere safe until the legal proceedings are done. Somewhere he can't get to you. Margaret looked at Elias. Your ranch is too exposed. He already knows where it is. There's a boarding house on the edge of town, Elias said, run by a woman named Sarah Pritchard. She's good people, doesn't scare easy. Clara could stay there while I go back for the kids and handle things at the ranch. You can't go back alone, Clara protested. What if Gideon's waiting for you? Then I'll deal with it. But I'm not leaving Nora and Benji with the Hendersons indefinitely. They need to be here, with us, where I can keep them safe. His jaw was set in that stubborn line Clara had come to recognize. Besides, if we're going to do this, if we're going to get married, the kids need to know. They deserve to understand what's happening and why. He was right, Clara knew, but the thought of him riding back into danger made her stomach clench. At least take someone with you. Don't go alone. I'll be fine. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. But his expression softened slightly. I'll be careful, and I'll be back within 3 days. 4 at most. Margaret had been watching this exchange with interest. You two have already been acting like a married couple, she observed. This will just make it official. She handed Elias a stack of papers. These are the witness statements I need you to fill out. Be detailed, be specific, but stick to what you personally observed. Don't speculate or embellish, and get them back to me as soon as possible. They left the lawyer's office as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Elias drove the wagon to the boarding house Margaret had mentioned, a neat 2-story building with lace curtains in the windows and a sign that read Pritchard House. Sarah Pritchard herself answered the door, a tall woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by work. She took one look at Clara and immediately ushered them inside. Margaret sent word you might be coming, she said. I've got a room ready, small but clean and warm. And don't you worry about anything. Nobody gets past my front door unless I let them. The room was indeed small, barely big enough for a bed and a washstand, but it was clean and the bed looked soft. Clara stood in the doorway, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. I'll stay tonight, Elias said. There's a room downstairs I can use. Tomorrow I'll head back to the ranch. Clara wanted to argue, to tell him it was too dangerous, but she was too tired. She just nodded and let Sarah show her to the washstand while Elias carried in her few belongings. That night, Clara lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. Footsteps in the hallway, voices murmuring downstairs, the creak of floorboards. Normal sounds, the kind that came from a building full of people living their lives. It should have been comforting, but all Clara felt was alone. She pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. We're going to be okay, she whispered. I promise. Whatever it takes, we're going to be okay. She just hoped it was a promise she could keep. Elias left before dawn, his farewell brief and his expression determined. Clara watched from her window as he drove the wagon out of town, heading back toward the ranch and the children and whatever trouble might be waiting. She wanted to call him back to tell him to stay where it was safe, but she knew he wouldn't listen. He was a man who kept his promises, and he'd promised to bring his children to her. The next 3 days crawled by like molasses. Clara stayed mostly in her room, venturing out only for meals and the occasional walk around the boarding house garden. Sarah Pritchard was a godsend, bringing her tea and books and gentle conversation that never pried too deep. The other boarders gave her curious looks but kept their distance, for which Clara was grateful. Margaret came by on the second day with updates. The divorce filing had been submitted and assigned to Judge Harrison, a man known for being fair but also deeply traditional. The hearing was set for 5 days out, which meant Clara would have to testify, would have to stand in front of a courtroom and detail every horrible thing Gideon had done. "Can you do that?" Margaret asked gently. "I know it won't be easy." "I can do whatever I have to do," Clara said, and meant it. On the third day, Elias returned. Clara was sitting in the front parlor when she heard the wagon pull up, and she was out the door before Sarah could even announce the arrival. Nora and Benji tumbled out of the wagon and ran to her, wrapping their arms around her waist and talking over each other in excited bursts. "We missed you," Benji said, his face pressed against her side. "Pa told us everything," Nora added, pulling back to look at Clara seriously. "About the divorce and the marriage and all of it. We think it's a good idea." Clara's throat went tight. "You do?" "Of course we do. You're already part of our family anyway. This just makes it real." Nora's expression turned fierce. "And we're not going to let that bad man take your baby. We're going to help you fight." Elias climbed down from the wagon, looking tired but unharmed. His eyes met Clara's over the children's heads, and something passed between them. Relief, gratitude, a shared understanding of what they were about to do and why it mattered. "Any trouble?" Clara asked. "None. Ranch is still standing, animals are fed, Hendersons send their best." He ruffled Benji's hair. "Kids were ready to come home. Or, well, ready to come here. Same difference." Sarah Pritchard appeared in the doorway. "I've got 2 more rooms ready if you need them, and supper will be ready in an hour." That night, they all sat around the boarding house dinner table like a makeshift family. Nora helped serve while Benji chattered about the things he'd done at the Hendersons' farm. Elias was quiet, methodical in his eating, but Clara caught him watching the children with something like contentment in his eyes. After the kids were settled in their rooms, Clara and Elias sat in the front parlor while Sarah bustled around cleaning up from dinner. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked quietly. "There's still time to back out. I wouldn't blame you." "I'm sure." Elias didn't hesitate. "Are you?" Clara thought about it, really thought about it. Marriage to Elias would be nothing like marriage to Gideon. There would be no violence, no fear, no walking on eggshells waiting for the next explosion. But there would be expectations, obligations, a life permanently intertwined with his. Was she ready for that? She looked at the man beside her, steady and solid and safe. Thought about Nora and Benji upstairs, already calling her part of the family. Thought about the baby growing inside her, who deserved a chance at a real life. "I'm sure," she said. The hearing happened on a gray Thursday morning with sleet falling from a sky the color of iron. Clara wore the only decent dress she owned, borrowed from Sarah and taken in at the waist to accommodate her belly. Margaret met them outside the courthouse, her face set in grim determination. "Remember," the lawyer said, "answer the questions directly. Don't embellish, don't speculate. Just tell the truth about what Gideon did and why you left. Can you do that?" Clara nodded, though her hands were shaking. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Just a single room with wooden benches and a raised platform where Judge Harrison sat looking down at them with the expression of a man who'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Gideon was already there, sitting at a table with a lawyer Clara didn't recognize, a thin man with sharp features and sharper eyes. The moment Gideon saw her, his face went cold. Clara felt Elias move closer, a silent presence at her back. "We're here regarding the petition for divorce filed by Clara Voss against Gideon Voss," Judge Harrison began. His voice was dry, bored almost. "Mrs. Voss claims abuse and abandonment as grounds. Mr. Voss contests these claims and has filed a counterpetition for the return of his wife. We'll hear from both sides, starting with Mrs. Voss." Margaret stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Clara Voss to testify." Clara walked to the witness chair on legs that felt like water. Someone handed her a Bible, told her to swear to tell the truth. She did, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret started with simple questions. Where had Clara met Gideon? When had they married? Where had they lived? Clara answered each one, her voice growing steadier as she went. Then the questions got harder. Mrs. Voss, did your husband ever strike you? Yes. Can you describe the first time it happened? Clara closed her eyes, remembering. It was about 3 months after we were married. We'd had an argument about money. I thought we should save what little we had. He wanted to spend it on whiskey. He backhanded me across the face, told me it was my fault for questioning him. And did the violence continue? Yes, it got worse after I got pregnant. He said, her voice caught. He said the baby wasn't his, called me names, hit me when I tried to defend myself. Gideon's lawyer stood. Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Voss is making serious allegations with no proof. This could all be fabrication designed to smear my client's reputation. Mrs. Voss, Judge Harrison said, do you have any evidence of this alleged abuse? Witnesses? Medical records? I have a witness, Margaret said quickly. Elias Boone found Mrs. Voss after she fled her husband. He can testify to the bruises and injuries he observed. I'll allow it, but I want to hear from Mrs. Voss first. Ma'am, can you describe the last incident before you left? Clara took a breath and told them. About the fight, about Gideon's threat to take the baby, about running into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, about walking for weeks, sleeping in barns, running out of food, about collapsing in the creek and thinking she was going to die there. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Gideon's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, this is a very emotional story, but emotion isn't evidence. My client maintains that Mrs. Voss left of her own accord, that there was no abuse, and that she has been living in an improper relationship with Mr. Boone. We ask that she be compelled to return to her lawful husband immediately. I'm not finished, Margaret said sharply. I'd like to call Elias Boone to the stand. Elias took the chair Clara had just vacated. He looked calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Margaret walked him through finding Clara, describing her condition in detail. The cuts on her feet, the bruises, the exhaustion, the advanced pregnancy. His testimony was clinical, factual, devastating in its simplicity. And what was your impression of Mrs. Voss's state of mind when you found her? Margaret asked. Terrified, Elias said bluntly. She flinched every time I moved too fast. Wouldn't let me touch her at first. She was convinced I was going to hurt her. He looked directly at the judge. I've seen wounded animals with that same look in their eyes. That's what Gideon Voss did to his wife. He broke her down until she was more animal than person, and then he threatened to take her baby. So yeah, I believe every word she said, because I saw what he did to her. Gideon's lawyer tried to tear apart Elias's testimony, suggesting he had ulterior motives for protecting Clara, implying the relationship was improper. But Elias didn't budge, answering every question with the same steady calm. Finally, Judge Harrison called for a recess. Clara, Elias, and Margaret retreated to a small side room while the judge deliberated. How do you think it went? Clara asked, her voice shaking. Hard to say, Margaret admitted. Harrison's a tough read, but your testimony was strong, and Mr. Boone's corroboration helped significantly. They waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Then they were called back in. Judge Harrison looked down at them, his expression unreadable. I've reviewed the testimony and the evidence presented. While Mrs. Voss's claims are serious, they are also largely uncorroborated beyond Mr. Boone's observations of her physical state after she allegedly fled. However, I'm inclined to believe that where there's smoke, there's fire. The bruising and injuries Mr. Boone described are consistent with Mrs. Voss's account of abuse. Clara held her breath. Therefore, I'm granting a temporary separation. Mrs. Voss is not required to return to her husband pending further investigation. However, he held up a hand. This is not a divorce. Not yet. I'm ordering a full investigation into the allegations of abuse. If they're substantiated, I'll grant the divorce. If they're not, Mrs. Voss will be required to return to her lawful husband. You have 60 days. It wasn't everything they'd hoped for, but it was something, a reprieve at least. Gideon stood abruptly. This is outrageous. She's my wife. She's under the protection of this court, Harrison said sharply. And I suggest you not test my patience, Mr. Voss. You're dismissed. Outside the courthouse, sleet still falling, Clara let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. 60 days, she said. That's not much time. It's enough, Margaret said. I'll start gathering evidence immediately. We'll get statements from anyone who might have witnessed Gideon's behavior, look for records of violence, anything we can find. And in the meantime, you're safe. But as they walked back to the boarding house, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Gideon had sat through that entire hearing with murder in his eyes, and she knew him well enough to know he wasn't going to accept the judge's ruling. He was going to come for her. It was just a matter of when. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed at the boarding house, listening to the wind howl outside and thinking about Gideon's face in the courtroom, the cold fury in his eyes, the way his hands had clenched on the table when the judge ruled against him. She knew that look, had seen it 100 times before, right before he lashed out. Around midnight, she gave up trying to rest and went downstairs to the kitchen. Sarah Pritchard was already there, sitting at the scarred wooden table with a cup of tea and a worn Bible open in front of her. Couldn't sleep either? The older woman asked kindly. Clara shook her head and accepted the cup of tea Sarah poured for her. My mind won't stop racing. Every time I close my eyes, I see him sitting there, staring at me like... She stopped, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Like he owns you, Sarah finished quietly. I know that look. My first husband had it too. Took me 5 years to get away from him, and another 3 before I stopped flinching at loud noises. She reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. But I did get away. And I built a life for myself, a good life. You will too. I'm not sure I believe that yet. You don't have to believe it. You just have to keep breathing, keep moving forward. Belief comes later when you look back and realize you survived. They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking tea and listening to the wind. Then Sarah said, That man of yours, Elias, he's a good one. I've known him since before his wife died. Never saw a man more devoted to his family. He's not my man, Clara said automatically, then corrected herself. I mean, he is legally or will be, but it's not, you're not in love with him, Sarah said, not unkindly. Yet, Clara looked up sharply. It's not like that. This is just a legal arrangement, a way to protect the baby. If you say so. Sarah's smile was knowing, but I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not paying attention, and the way you relax when he walks into a room, like his presence makes you feel safer. That might not be love yet, but it's the beginning of something. Clara wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because Sarah wasn't entirely wrong. She did feel safer with Elias near. Did find herself listening for his voice, looking for him when she walked into a room. But was that love or just gratitude? Was it real affection or just her desperate need for protection, latching onto the first kind man she'd found? I don't know how to tell the difference anymore, she admitted, between what's real and what's just survival. Give it time, Sarah advised. Time and honesty. Keep showing up, keep being truthful with each other, and eventually you'll know what you're feeling. And if it's not love, well, there are worse things than a marriage built on respect and partnership. The next morning brought news that scattered Clara's fragile peace like buckshot through glass. Margaret arrived at the boarding house before breakfast, her face drawn and tired. We have a problem, the lawyer said without preamble. Gideon filed an emergency petition last night claiming you're an unfit mother. He's asking the court to place the baby in his custody immediately upon birth, pending the outcome of the divorce investigation. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He can't do that. The baby isn't even born yet. He can try. And unfortunately, he's got a decent argument. You're currently living in a boarding house with no permanent residence, no income, no means of support. He's got a home, a job, resources. On paper, he looks like the more stable parent. He beat me, Clara said, her voice rising. He threatened to take my baby. How is that stable? We haven't proven the abuse yet. That's what the 60-day investigation is for. But Gideon's lawyer is arguing that the allegations are fabricated and that your current living situation, staying in the same boarding house as the man you plan to marry before your divorce is even finalized, proves you're morally unfit. Elias, who'd been standing quietly by the window, turned around. When's the hearing? 3 days from now. Judge Harrison wants to resolve the custody question before the baby arrives. Margaret set her bag on the table and pulled out a stack of papers. Here's what we need to do. First, we need to prove Clara has stable housing and support. Mr. Boone, would you be willing to testify that you're prepared to provide for Clara and the baby immediately? Of course. Second, we need character witnesses, people who can speak to Clara's character, her fitness as a mother. Do you know anyone in town who would be willing to testify on your behalf? Clara thought about it and came up empty. She'd been so isolated during her marriage to Gideon, and since arriving here, she'd barely left the boarding house. I don't know anyone here except you and Sarah. I'll testify, Sarah said immediately from the doorway. She'd clearly been listening. I'll tell the judge exactly what kind of woman Clara is. Brave, hardworking, kind to children. I've had her under my roof for weeks now. I know her character. That helps, Margaret said. What about back in Missouri? Any family members, friends, anyone who knew you before Gideon? My sister, Clara said slowly. Emma. We were close before I married, but I haven't spoken to her in over a year. Gideon didn't like me writing to her. Do you think she'd speak for you if we contacted her? I don't know, maybe. If she got my letters, if she knows what really happened, Clara's voice cracked. I told her things were bad, but I never told her how bad. I was too ashamed. Shame is what men like Gideon count on, Margaret said firmly. It's what keeps their victims silent. But we're going to break that silence. I'll send a telegram to your sister today. With any luck, we'll get a response before the hearing. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and anxiety. Margaret drilled Clara on what to say, how to present herself, what questions to expect from Gideon's lawyer. Elias gave his statement, documenting everything he was prepared to provide: housing, food, support, a family. Sarah practiced her testimony until she could recite Clara's virtues without hesitation. And through it all, Clara felt the baby moving inside her, increasingly active as if sensing its mother's distress. She found herself talking to it late at night, one hand on her belly, making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. I won't let him take you, she whispered. I don't care what I have to do. You're mine, and I'm going to keep you safe. The morning of the hearing, a telegram arrived. Margaret tore it open, read it quickly, and smiled for the first time in days. Your sister's on her way. She's taking the train, should arrive tomorrow, and she says she kept every letter you sent her. The lawyer looked up. Clara, this could be exactly what we need. Contemporary written evidence of abuse documented over time. It's not proof of specific incidents, but it establishes a pattern. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Hope, maybe, or relief. Emma was coming. Her sister, who she'd thought lost to her forever, was coming to help. The hearing was even more brutal than the first one. Gideon's lawyer painted Clara as an adulteress who'd abandoned her marriage to shack up with another man, using pregnancy as a tool to gain sympathy and resources. He brought up her living situation, her lack of employment, her dependence on Elias's charity. Every word was designed to make her look weak, unstable, unfit. When it was Margaret's turn, she struck back hard. She called Sarah Pritchard to the stand, and the boarding house owner described Clara's character with fierce conviction. Called her responsible, gentle with children, hardworking despite her condition. Described finding her mending torn clothes late at night, helping with dishes even when she could barely stand, reading to the children who stayed at the boarding house. Then Margaret called Elias. His testimony was quieter, but somehow more powerful. He described Clara's relationship with Nora and Benji, the way she'd comforted his son through nightmares, taught his daughter to braid hair, filled their house with warmth it hadn't had since Miriam died. He outlined his finances, his property, his ability to provide. And when Gideon's lawyer tried to imply impropriety, Elias looked the man dead in the eye and said, I've offered Clara marriage because she deserves a partner who will protect her, not hurt her. Because her child deserves a father who will love them, not use them as a weapon. If that's improper, then I'm guilty as charged. The courtroom went very quiet after that. Judge Harrison called a brief recess. When they reconvened, he looked tired and irritated. I'm going to be blunt, he said. This case is a mess. We've got allegations of abuse that haven't been fully investigated, claims of adultery that haven't been proven, and a child who isn't even born yet at the center of all this fighting. Here's my ruling. The baby stays with its mother upon birth. That's standard unless there's compelling evidence of immediate danger, which I haven't seen. However, he fixed Clara with a stern look. I'm ordering a home visit within 2 weeks of the birth. A court representative will inspect your living situation and report back on the child's welfare. If everything is satisfactory, custody remains with you. If there are concerns, we'll revisit this matter. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor, Clara whispered. As for the divorce petition, the 60-day investigation continues. Mr. Voss, you're not to contact Mrs. Voss directly or indirectly during this period. If you violate this order, I'll hold you in contempt. We're adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Clara's legs gave out. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight easily. I've got you, he murmured. You're okay. I almost lost, Clara said, her voice shaking. If you hadn't testified, if Sarah hadn't... But we did. And you didn't lose. The baby stays with you. Elias helped her to a bench, then sat beside her. The fight's not over, but we won this round. Margaret joined them, looking grimly satisfied. The home visit is actually good news. It means the judge isn't automatically siding with Gideon. But we need to make sure everything is perfect when that inspector comes. Clara needs to be in a stable home, with visible means of support, in a clear family structure. She will be, Elias said. As soon as the divorce is granted, we'll marry. Make everything legal and official. About that, Margaret pulled out another set of papers. I did some research. There's a provision in territorial law for expedited marriage licenses in cases of extreme hardship. Given Clara's condition and the circumstances, I think I can make the case that waiting for the full divorce to process would create undue hardship. We might be able to get you married within a week or two after the divorce is granted, instead of the usual waiting period. How soon could the divorce come through? Clara asked. If your sister's testimony and the letters are as strong as I hope, maybe 3 weeks, a month at most, which means the baby could arrive before you're remarried. Margaret looked at Clara seriously. That's not ideal for the home visit. The inspector will want to see a stable 2-parent household, not a woman living in a boarding house with her baby. Then we'll do it differently, Elias said. Clara, come back to the ranch. Now, before the baby comes. Bring the kids. Bring Sarah if she's willing to come as chaperone to prevent talk. We'll set up everything properly. Separate rooms, all above board, so when that inspector comes, they see a real home, not a temporary situation. Clara looked at him. At this man who kept offering her everything without asking for anything in return. Are you sure? The gossip will get worse. Let it. I stopped caring about gossip the day I decided to marry you. He smiled slightly. Besides, Nora and Benji miss home, and I think you do too. He was right. Clara had felt safe at the ranch in a way she hadn't felt anywhere else, even the boarding house. It had started to feel like home, like a place where she belonged. Okay, she said, let's go home. Emma arrived the next day on the afternoon train, and the moment Clara saw her sister stepping onto the platform, she burst into tears. Emma was older, more weathered than Clara remembered, but her eyes were the same, warm and fierce and loving. They held each other on the platform while people streamed around them, neither one able to speak through their crying. Finally, Emma pulled back, her hands framing Clara's face. Let me look at you. Oh, Clara, what did that monster do to you? I'm okay now, or I will be. Clara wiped her eyes. Did you bring the letters? Every single one. I knew something was wrong from the first one you sent. The way you wrote, so careful, like you were choosing every word afraid someone would read it. Emma's face hardened. I wanted to come then, but John, my husband, he said I shouldn't interfere in another couple's marriage. I should have come anyway. I'm sorry I didn't. You're here now. That's what matters. They went directly to Margaret's office, where Emma produced a bundle of letters tied with string. Margaret read through them carefully, her expression growing darker with each page. These are good, she said finally. Very good. Clara never explicitly says Gideon hit her, but the implications are clear. References to being clumsy, to walking into doors, to being too tired to write for weeks at a time after Gideon was particularly angry. And this one, she held up a letter, where you mention being afraid to see a doctor about the pregnancy because of what they might find. That's damning. Will it be enough? Emma asked. Combined with Mr. Boone's testimony and Clara's account? Yes. I think it will be enough to get the divorce granted on grounds of abuse. Margaret set the letters down carefully. Mrs. Wade, would you be willing to testify about these letters, to authenticate them and explain what your sister told you? Absolutely. Whatever it takes to help Clara get away from that man. The hearing to finalize the divorce was set for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Clara moved back to the ranch with Nora and Benji, who greeted her return with unrestrained joy. Sarah Pritchard came too, settling into the spare room upstairs and immediately taking over the kitchen with cheerful efficiency. The house transformed almost overnight. Sarah cooked meals that filled the air with the smell of bread and herbs. Nora helped Clara sort through baby clothes donated by women in town who'd heard her story and decided to help despite the gossip. Benji built a cradle in the barn with Elias, hammering away with fierce concentration, and Emma stayed close to Clara's side, helping with the endless preparations and telling stories about their childhood that made Clara laugh until her sides hurt. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Clara felt like she could breathe. But as her due date drew closer, Margaret estimated she had maybe 3 weeks left. The anxiety started building again. What if something went wrong with the birth? What if the divorce didn't come through in time? What if Gideon found some way to take the baby despite the judge's order? Elias found her one evening sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, one hand on her belly, staring out at the darkening sky. "Worrying again?" he asked gently, settling into the chair beside her. "Can't seem to stop. Want to tell me what about this time?" Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I don't know how to do this? My own mother died when I was 12. I barely remember what it was like to be taken care of. What if I mess this up?" Elias reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from work. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who walked for weeks through hostile country, pregnant and alone, because she was determined to protect her child. Someone who stood up in court and told the truth, even though it was terrifying. Someone who my kids love because you're kind and patient, and you see them as people, not just children to be managed." He squeezed her hand. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Clara. Not a perfect one. Nobody is. But a wonderful one." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I don't. I just say what's true." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, until the sky was full of light. The final divorce hearing came on a cold morning with frost thick on the ground. Clara was so pregnant now she could barely walk without waddling, and her back ached constantly. But she dressed in her best borrowed dress and went to court with Margaret, Elias, Emma, and a determination that burned like fire in her chest. The hearing was mercifully brief. Margaret presented Emma's testimony and the letters. Emma spoke clearly and firmly about her sister's character and the evidence of abuse documented in their correspondence. Gideon's lawyer tried to discredit the letters, arguing they were too vague, too subject to interpretation. But Judge Harrison shut him down. "I've read these letters myself," the judge said, "and I've seen enough of these cases to know what I'm looking at. A woman documenting abuse without saying it outright because she's afraid. A woman asking her sister for help in coded language. This, combined with the physical evidence Mr. Boone observed, is sufficient." He looked at Gideon. "Mr. Voss, I'm granting the divorce on grounds of physical abuse and emotional cruelty. The marriage is dissolved effective immediately." Clara felt the words wash over her like cool water. Dissolved. Over. Done. "However," Harrison continued, "the question of paternity remains unresolved. Mr. Voss, you may petition for a paternity determination after the child is born. But until such time as paternity is legally established, you have no custodial rights. Mrs. Voss, or I suppose it's Miss Voss now, has full custody." It wasn't perfect. It left the door open for Gideon to come back later, to demand rights based on biology. But it was enough. It was freedom. Outside the courthouse, Clara broke down completely. Emma held her while she sobbed, years of fear and pain and desperate hope pouring out all at once. When she finally got control of herself, she found Elias waiting patiently beside the wagon. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Home." The word settled into Clara's chest, warm and right. "Yeah," she said. "Let's go home." The marriage happened 3 days later in the front room of the ranch house with just a handful of witnesses. Margaret had expedited the license exactly as promised, and the circuit preacher who served the outlying communities agreed to perform the ceremony despite the rushed timing and Clara's obvious condition. Clara wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had altered to fit her swollen belly. She'd woven wildflowers into her hair, the last of the season, gathered by Nora and Benji that morning. Elias wore his best shirt and looked nervous in a way Clara had never seen before. The ceremony itself was brief and practical. They spoke their vows standing in front of the fireplace, with Emma and Sarah as witnesses and the children standing close by. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Elias hesitated, his eyes asking permission. Clara nodded, and he kissed her softly, chastely, a promise sealed with his lips against hers. Then it was done. She was Clara Boone now, legally and completely. That night, after the small celebration dinner Sarah had prepared, after Emma and the preacher had left and the children were in bed, Clara and Elias stood together in the kitchen cleaning up. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for everything, for saving my life, for protecting me, for giving me and the baby a real chance. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I want to." She turned to face him. "I know this marriage is a legal arrangement. I know you did it to help me, not because we—" She fumbled for words. "Because we're not in love," Elias finished. His voice was gentle, understanding. "I know, but Clara, just because we're not in love now doesn't mean we can't build something real, something good. We respect each other. We work well together. We care about each other's well-being. That's more than a lot of marriages start with. Is it enough? For now, yes. For the future?" He shrugged. "We'll figure it out as we go. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people trying to build a life together." Clara felt something ease in her chest. "I can do that. So can I." They finished the dishes in companionable silence, and when they went upstairs, Elias walked Clara to her room, still separate, still hers, and bid her good night with a smile that made her think maybe, someday, this could be more than just a legal arrangement. Maybe it could be real. 2 weeks later, on a night when the wind howled and snow fell thick and fast, Clara's water broke. Clara woke to a sensation like something breaking deep inside her body, followed by warmth spreading beneath her. For a moment, she lay there in the darkness, disoriented and confused. Then another wave hit her, a tightening across her belly that stole her breath, and she understood. The baby was coming. She managed to light the lamp on her bedside table with shaking hands, then called out as loudly as she dared without waking the children. "Elias! Elias!" His door opened almost immediately, and he appeared in her doorway, still pulling on his shirt, his hair standing up in every direction. "What's wrong?" "The baby, it's coming now." Whatever grogginess had been in his eyes vanished instantly. He was across the room in 3 strides, his hand on her shoulder. "How long have you been having contractions?" "I don't know. The first one just woke me up." Even as she spoke, another contraction gripped her, harder this time, and she gasped. All right. We're okay." Elias's voice was calm, steady, the same tone he used when gentling a spooked horse. "Sarah's down the hall. I'll get her, and we'll send for the midwife. You just breathe, understand? In and out, nice and slow." He disappeared, and Clara heard him knocking on Sarah's door, his voice low and urgent. Within minutes, Sarah was there in her nightgown and robe, her gray hair in a long braid down her back, her capable hands helping Clara sit up. "Let's get you more comfortable," Sarah said. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know. They're close, really close." Sarah and Elias exchanged a look that made Clara's stomach twist with something beyond the contractions. "What? What is it?" "Nothing to worry about," Sarah said quickly. "But if they're coming that fast already, this baby might not wait for the midwife. Elias, you need to ride now. Get Mrs. Henderson. She's helped birth more babies than anyone in 3 counties. And ride hard." Elias hesitated, clearly torn between leaving and staying. Clara reached out and gripped his hand. "Go. I'll be fine with Sarah. Just hurry." He nodded and was gone, his boots thundering down the stairs. Clara heard the front door slam, then the sound of hooves pounding away into the night. The contractions came faster after that, each one building on the last until Clara lost track of time completely. Sarah helped her walk, told her when to breathe and when to push and when to rest. At some point, Nora appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide and frightened, and Sarah gently sent her back to bed with instructions to watch Benji and keep him calm. Clara had thought she understood pain, had thought the beatings Gideon gave her, the fear and desperation of her flight, had prepared her for anything. But this was different. This was her body tearing itself apart to bring new life into the world, and there was no escaping it, no running from it. All she could do was endure. "You're doing so well," Sarah kept saying, her cool hand on Clara's forehead. "So strong. Just a little longer." But the minutes stretched into an hour, then two, and still Elias didn't return. The storm outside had worsened, wind shrieking around the corners of the house, snow pelting the windows. Clara could hear it even through her own cries, and terror started to claw at her chest. What if he couldn't get through? What if the midwife couldn't come? What if something went wrong and there was no one here who knew how to help? "Sarah," she gasped between contractions. "Something's wrong. It shouldn't take this long. The baby should be here by now." "First babies take their time," Sarah said firmly. "There's nothing wrong. You're doing everything right. The baby's just being stubborn, taking after its mama." Another contraction hit, the worst one yet, and Clara screamed. She couldn't help it. The pain was too much, too overwhelming. She gripped Sarah's hand so hard her knuckles went white, and somewhere in the back of her mind she thought, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die here, and Gideon will take my baby after all." Then she heard it, hooves outside, voices shouting over the wind. The front door crashed open and boots pounded up the stairs. Elias burst into the room with a woman Clara had never met. A sturdy older woman with iron gray hair and hands that looked like they could wrestle a calf if needed. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said with obvious relief. Thank heavens. The midwife took in the situation with one sweeping glance, then rolled up her sleeves. "All right, let's see where we're at. Elias, I need hot water and clean towels. Sarah, help me get her positioned properly." "Clara, that's your name, right?" "Clara, you listen to me. I've delivered more than 200 babies, and I haven't lost a mother yet. You're not going to be the first. Understand?" Clara managed a nod. What followed was a blur of pain and pressure and Mrs. Henderson's commanding voice telling her when to push and when to wait. Sarah held one of her hands, and at some point Elias came back and held the other, murmuring encouragement even though his face was white with worry. The room was too hot, the air thick with the smell of blood and sweat and fear. "I can see the head," Mrs. Henderson announced. "One more push, Clara, one more big one. You can do this." Clara bore down with everything she had left, a sound she didn't recognize tearing from her throat. The pressure peaked unbearable, and then suddenly released all at once. A baby's cry filled the room, thin and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Mrs. Henderson said, lifting the squalling infant and placing him on Clara's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Clara stared down at her son through tears she didn't remember starting to cry. He was red-faced and screaming, his tiny fists waving in the air, and he was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She gathered him close, feeling his warmth against her skin, his rapid heartbeat fluttering like a bird's. "Hello?" she whispered. "Hello, little one. I'm your mama. I've got you. You're safe now." The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his dark eyes trying to focus on her face. Clara looked up and found Elias watching them both, his expression soft with wonder. "He's perfect," Elias said quietly. "He is," Clara agreed. "He really is." Mrs. Henderson worked efficiently, delivering the afterbirth and checking Clara for tears that might need stitching. Sarah cleaned the baby with gentle hands, then wrapped him in soft blankets and returned him to Clara's arms. Through it all, Clara couldn't stop staring at her son, marveling at his tiny fingers and the dark fuzz of hair on his head. "Have you chosen a name?" Sarah asked. Clara looked at Elias. They'd discussed it a few times tentatively, but never settled on anything definite. "What do you think? He's part of your family now, too." Elias was quiet for a moment, studying the baby with those thoughtful eyes. "My grandfather's name was Silas. He was a good man, fair and kind. Raised my father on his own after my grandmother died. I always thought if I had another son, I'd name him that." "Silas," Clara repeated, testing the sound of it. "Silas Boone." She looked down at her baby, at the small person who'd fought so hard to be born, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Yes, that's perfect. Dawn was breaking by the time Mrs. Henderson and Sarah finally let Clara rest. The baby, Silas, was nestled in the cradle Benji had helped build, sleeping peacefully after nursing for the first time. Clara lay in bed, exhausted beyond measure but unable to sleep, watching the pale light creep across the floor. There was a soft knock on the door, and Elias looked in. "Can I come in?" Clara nodded, and he entered quietly, carrying a cup of something that smelled like chamomile and honey. "Sarah said you should drink this. It'll help you heal." She took the cup gratefully and sipped. The tea was sweet and soothing, warming her from the inside. Elias settled into the chair beside her bed, his elbows on his knees, looking at the sleeping baby. "I was terrified," he admitted quietly, "riding through that storm, not knowing if I'd make it back in time, not knowing if you'd be all right." He looked up at her. "When Miriam died, I swore I'd never go through that again, never watch someone I cared about slip away. And tonight, for a few hours, I thought—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I'm okay," Clara said softly. "We both are. Thanks to you. If you hadn't gotten Mrs. Henderson, you would have been fine. Sarah's capable, and you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." He smiled slightly. "But I'm glad I made it back anyway." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Silas sleep. Then Clara said, "The court inspector is supposed to come within 2 weeks. We need to be ready." "We will be. The house is clean, we've got supplies, and now you've got a healthy baby to show them. Everything's going to be fine." Clara wanted to believe that. But even now, with her son sleeping peacefully a few feet away, she couldn't quite silence the voice in her head that whispered, Gideon wouldn't let this go, that he'd find some way to take Silas away from her, some legal loophole or technicality that would give him power over her again. As if reading her thoughts, Elias reached over and took her hand. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore, Clara. You've got me, the kids, Sarah, Margaret. We're all standing with you." "I know," Clara whispered. "I just wish I knew it was enough." The court inspector arrived on a bitter cold morning 10 days after Silas was born. Clara had spent the intervening days in a fog of sleepless nights and constant feeding, learning the rhythms of her son's needs and marveling at how completely this tiny person had taken over her entire world. But she'd also prepared obsessively, making sure the house was spotless, that every detail was perfect, that nothing could give the inspector reason to doubt her fitness as a mother. The inspector turned out to be a thin, severe-looking woman named Mrs. Caldwell, who arrived with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind and was just going through the motions. She walked through the house with sharp eyes, noting everything: the clean floors, the well-stocked pantry, the children's tidy rooms. She asked to see where Silas slept, examined the cradle and the blankets, checked that Clara had adequate supplies for the baby's care. Then she sat at the kitchen table and began asking questions. "Mrs. Boone, how long have you been married to Mr. Boone?" 3 weeks. "And how long had you known him before the marriage?" Clara calculated quickly. "About 3 months." Mrs. Caldwell made a note. "That's quite a short courtship, especially given your condition when you met." "It was a practical arrangement," Clara said carefully, using the words Margaret had coached her to say. "I needed protection and stability for my child. Elias offered both. And your previous husband, Mr. Voss, does he know about the baby?" "Yes. He filed petitions trying to claim custody before Silas was born." "But he hasn't attempted to see the child since the birth?" Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "No. The judge's order prevents him from contacting me directly." Mrs. Caldwell made another note, her expression unreadable. "Tell me about your daily routine. Who cares for the baby? Do you have help?" Clara described her days, the feeding and changing, the sleepless nights, the way Sarah helped with the household while Clara recovered. She talked about Nora and Benji, how they doted on their new brother, how they helped entertain him when Clara needed rest. She explained Elias's work on the ranch, the income it provided, the stability of their life here. Through it all, Mrs. Caldwell wrote and watched and gave nothing away. Finally, after what felt like hours, the inspector set down her pen. "I'd like to observe you with the baby. A normal interaction, nothing staged." Clara's heart hammered, but she nodded and went to the cradle where Silas was just starting to fuss. She picked him up, settling him against her shoulder, and began the gentle swaying motion that usually calmed him. He rooted against her neck, making small, hungry sounds, and Clara moved to the rocking chair to nurse him. Mrs. Caldwell watched in silence as Clara fed her son, as Silas's small hand curled around her finger as she murmured soft nonsense to him about nothing at all. The inspector's expression remained neutral, but Clara thought she saw something soften in the woman's eyes. When Silas finished eating and drifted back to sleep, Clara burped him gently and returned him to the cradle. She turned to find Mrs. Caldwell standing. "I've seen what I need to see," the inspector said. "I'll file my report with Judge Harrison within the week." "And?" Clara couldn't help asking. "What will you tell him?" Mrs. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. "I'll tell him the truth, that I observed a clean, well-maintained home, a mother who is clearly bonded with her infant and competent in his care, a stable household with adequate resources and support." She paused. "I'll also note that while the circumstances of your marriage are unusual, the family structure appears genuine and functional." Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I just report what I see." "But Mrs. Boone," the inspector's voice took on a harder edge, "I've read the file on your case. I know what your first husband did to you. And I know men like him don't give up easily. If Mr. Voss comes around here, if he tries to take that baby, you call for the sheriff immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." "I won't," Clara promised. Mrs. Caldwell left, and Clara stood at the window watching her ride away. Elias came up behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder. "How did it go?" "Good, I think. She said the report would be positive." Clara leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "But she also warned me that Gideon might try something, that men like him don't give up." "Then we'll be ready," Elias said simply. But being ready didn't stop the fear that crept in during the dark hours when Clara was awake nursing Silas, listening to the house settle and wondering if every sound was Gideon coming to take her baby away. The report came back a week later, and it was everything Mrs. Caldwell had promised. A clear recommendation that Silas remain in Clara's custody, with no concerns about the home environment or her fitness as a mother. Margaret delivered the news in person, her smile broad and genuine. "This is huge," the lawyer said. "With this report and the divorce already granted, Gideon's legal standing is almost nothing. He could still petition for paternity rights, but given the documented abuse and his documented threats to separate you from the baby, no judge is going to grant him custody." "So it's over?" Clara asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Not completely. Gideon could still file appeals, could still try to make trouble. But the worst is behind you. You've won, Clara. You and your baby are safe." Clara looked down at Silas sleeping in her arms, at this small person who'd given her reason to keep fighting when she'd wanted to give up. Safe. The word still felt foreign, like something that happened to other people but never to her. But maybe, just maybe, it could be true. That night, for the first time since Silas was born, Clara actually slept for more than 2 hours at a stretch. When she woke, dawn light was streaming through the window, and she could hear voices downstairs, Elias and the children, Sarah humming as she worked in the kitchen. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She fed Silas and changed him, marveling as always at his tiny perfection, then carried him downstairs. Nora squealed and immediately reached for the baby, cooing at him in the high voice she reserved just for him. Benji showed Clara a picture he'd drawn, a stick figure family with a tiny baby in the middle. "That's us," he announced proudly. "Our whole family." Clara looked at the drawing, at the 5 figures holding hands, and felt something crack open in her chest. This was her family now. Not by blood, not all of them, but by choice and commitment and the 1,000 small acts of care that bound them together. Elias met her eyes across the kitchen and smiled, and Clara smiled back. 3 weeks later, on a morning when the first hints of spring were showing in the greening grass and early wildflowers, a rider came up the road to the ranch. Clara, who was hanging laundry while Sarah watched Silas, felt her heart leap into her throat when she recognized the horse. Sheriff Wade. But it wasn't Wade alone. There was another horse, and on it, Gideon. Clara dropped the sheet she'd been hanging and ran for the house. "Elias! Sarah! He's here!" Elias appeared from the barn, saw the riders, and his expression went hard. "Get inside. Take the baby and get inside now." Clara didn't argue. She grabbed Silas from Sarah's arms and shepherded the older woman and the children into the house, locking the door behind them. Through the window, she watched as Elias walked out to meet the sheriff and Gideon. his rifle held loose in his hands, but clearly visible. The three men talked, too far away for Clara to hear the words. But she could see Gideon's face, red with anger, his hands gesturing wildly, could see Wade trying to calm him, to mediate, could see Elias standing firm, immovable as granite. Then Gideon tried to push past Elias toward the house, and everything exploded. Elias stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Gideon shoved him, and Elias shoved back harder. Wade was shouting something, trying to get between them, but Gideon was beyond reason now. He swung at Elias, a wild haymaker that Elias ducked easily, and then Elias hit him back, a solid punch that sent Gideon stumbling backward. "Stay down," Clara heard Elias shout. "I'm warning you, Voss. Stay down and ride away, or I swear." But Gideon was up again, charging like a bull. This time, when Elias hit him, he went down and stayed down, blood streaming from his nose. Wade had his gun out now, pointed at the sky, but clearly ready to aim it elsewhere if needed. "That's enough. Both of you. That's enough." Elias backed away, his chest heaving. "He's trespassing. I want him off my property." "Mr. Voss came to see his son," Wade said, but he sounded uncertain. "He's got a right." "He's got no rights," Elias snapped. "The court already ruled on this. Clara has full custody, and there's a protective order preventing Voss from coming near her or the baby. You know that, Wade. You were in the courtroom when the judge said it." Gideon struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his face. When he spoke, his voice was thick with rage. "She's poisoned you against me, filled your head with lies. That baby is mine, and I'm not leaving without him." "Yes, you are," Elias said flatly. "Because if you take one more step toward this house, I'm going to shoot you. And Wade here is going to have to decide whether he wants to arrest me for defending my family or arrest you for violating a court order. Which do you think a judge is going to look on more kindly?" Wade looked between them, clearly torn. Then he said, heavily, "Mr. Voss, you need to leave. Mr. Boone is right. There's a court order in place. You can't be here." "This isn't over," Gideon spat. "I'll file another petition. I'll take this all the way to the Territorial Supreme Court if I have to. That's my son, and I'm going to get him back." "You do that," Elias said. "File all the petitions you want. But that baby in there? His name is Silas Boone. I'm his father, and you're never getting near him." For a long moment, Gideon just stared at him with murder in his eyes. Then he turned and mounted his horse, spurring it hard enough to make the animal rear. He galloped away down the road, leaving nothing but dust and threat behind. Wade holstered his gun and looked at Elias apologetically. "I had to bring him," he insisted, "and technically he's got a right to petition the court." "I know the law, Wade. Just make sure your report mentions that he got violent, that he had to be physically restrained from forcing his way into my home." "I will." Wade mounted his own horse. "For what it's worth, Boone, I think you did right by that woman. Not everyone would have." He rode away, leaving Elias standing alone in the yard. Clara unlocked the door and came out, Silas in her arms, her whole body shaking. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He's gone, for now." Elias's jaw was tight, his knuckles bloody from the punch. "But he meant what he said. He's going to keep fighting." "Let him fight," Clara said, and was surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Let him file 1,000 petitions. It won't change anything. You're Silas's father. You're my husband, and no court is going to undo that just because Gideon Voss can't accept that he lost." Elias looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "When did you get so fierce?" "I've always been fierce," Clara said. "I just forgot for a while. But I remember now." She walked to him and, balancing Silas carefully, reached up to cup Elias's face with her free hand. "Thank you for standing up to him, for protecting us, for everything." Elias covered her hand with his. "You're my wife. He's my son. There's nothing to thank me for." And standing there in the spring sunshine with her baby in her arms and this good, steady man beside her, Clara finally believed it. Believed she was safe. Believed she had a home. Believed she'd actually survived and come out the other side into something better than she'd ever imagined possible. Gideon filed 3 more petitions over the next 6 months, each one more desperate than the last. Each one was denied. The evidence against him was too strong, the documentation of abuse too thorough, and the fact that Clara was now happily remarried with a stable home made it impossible for any judge to rule in his favor. The last petition came with a note from Margaret. Gideon had left the territory, headed south toward Texas. He'd given up. Clara burned the note in the fireplace and didn't mention it to anyone. Gideon Voss belonged to her past, and she was done letting the past have any power over her future. That future unfolded slowly in the way of seasons changing and children growing. Silas learned to smile, then laugh, then sit up on his own. Nora started teaching him songs, her young voice patient as she sang the same verses over and over. Benji appointed himself Silas's protector, watching over the baby with fierce devotion. And Clara and Elias learned each other slowly, carefully, building something real out of what had started as necessity. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the way Elias liked his coffee and the way Clara hummed while she worked. They learned to communicate in the shorthand of long-married couples, finishing each other's sentences and reading moods in the set of shoulders or the tone of voice. It wasn't passion or grand romance. It was quieter than that, deeper. It was Elias bringing Clara coffee when she'd been up all night with the baby. It was Clara mending his favorite shirt even though it was more whole than fabric. It was the two of them sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing while the stars came out overhead. It was Clara realized one day, love. Not the desperate, consuming kind she'd once thought she wanted, but something steadier and stronger. Something that would last. On Silas's first birthday, they had a small celebration. Sarah baked a cake, and Emma came all the way from Missouri with her husband and children to meet her nephew properly. The house was full of noise and laughter, and the kind of chaos that came from too many people in too small a space, all of them happy. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway watching it all, Silas smashing cake into his face with gleeful abandon, Nora trying to teach her cousins a clapping game, Benji showing off his collection of carved animals, Elias and Emma's husband talking about crops and rainfall, her family, all of them, blood and chosen both. Sarah appeared at her elbow. Happy? Deliriously, Clara admitted. Good, you've earned it. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. I remember when Elias first brought you to my boarding house. You looked like a ghost, like you were barely holding yourself together. Look at you now. Clara looked down at herself, sturdy and healthy, her body fully recovered from childbirth, her dress clean and well made. Then she looked around the room again, at all these people who loved her, who'd fought for her, who'd made a place for her when she had nowhere else to go. I didn't do it alone, she said quietly. No, but you had to make the choice to accept help, to let people in. That takes courage, too. Later, after the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Clara and Elias sat on the porch in the gathering dusk. Silas was asleep against Clara's shoulder, milk-drunk and content, his small hand fisted in her dress. Good birthday? Elias asked. Perfect birthday. Clara shifted Silas slightly, getting more comfortable. Can I ask you something? Anything. When you found me in that creek, did you ever imagine it would turn into all this? A wife, another child, the whole complicated mess of it? Elias was quiet for a moment, thinking. Honestly, no. I thought I was just helping someone who needed it, that you'd heal up and move on, and that would be that. I never imagined. He gestured vaguely at the house, the family inside it, the life they'd built. This. Do you regret it? Any of it? He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. Not for a single second. You and Silas, you brought life back to this house, to me. I was just going through the motions before you came. Now I'm actually living again. Clara felt her throat go tight. I love you, she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it completely. Somewhere between the legal arrangement and the everyday partnership, she'd fallen in love with this man. With his steadiness and his kindness and the way he'd chosen to stand beside her when he had every reason to walk away. Elias's expression softened. I love you too. Have for a while now, if I'm being honest. Just didn't know if you felt the same or if you were still just surviving, Clara finished. I was, for a long time, but I'm not anymore. Now I'm living too. He leaned over and kissed her, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby between them. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Clara asked, What do you think happens now? With our lives, I mean. With all of us. I think we keep doing what we've been doing. We work the ranch, we raise the kids, we build something good here. And when troubles come, because they will, we face them together. He smiled. Not very exciting, maybe, but solid, real. Solid and real sounds perfect, Clara said, and meant it. The years that followed bore out Elias's prediction. There were troubles, as there always were in frontier life. Harsh winters and dry summers, sick livestock and failed crops. The endless struggle to keep a ranch running when nature itself seemed determined to tear it down. But they faced each challenge together, Clara and Elias and the children, building their lives one day at a time. Nora grew into a bright, fierce young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Benji discovered a talent for woodworking and began making furniture that people from 3 counties came to buy. And Silas grew up knowing nothing but love and safety, with no memory of the violence that had preceded his birth and no knowledge that the man who raised him wasn't his blood father. As far as Silas was concerned, Elias was simply Pa, and that was all there was to it. Clara never forgot where she'd come from, the woman she'd been when Elias pulled her out of that creek, but she didn't dwell on it either. The past was done, and what mattered now was the present. This house full of children and laughter, this man who'd chosen her every single day, this life she'd built from the wreckage of everything that came before. On their 5th anniversary, Elias gave her a gift, a new rocking chair he'd made himself, sturdy oak with her initials carved into the headrest. CB for Clara Boone. She ran her fingers over the letters and felt the permanence of them, the way they declared that she belonged here, that this was her name and her home and her life. "It's perfect," she said. "So are you," Elias replied, pulling her close. They sat together in that rocking chair, built wide enough for 2, because Elias had known they'd want to share it, and watched the sun set over the ranch, over their land, their home, the life they'd fought so hard to build and protect. And Clara thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, broken and terrified and certain she'd die in the mud. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited on the other side of all that pain, the love and the family and the peace, would she believe it? Probably not. But she'd survived anyway, had fought her way through the darkness into the light, and now here she was, wrapped in the arms of a good man, surrounded by children who called her mama, living a life she'd never dared imagine possible. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was thanking. Elias, maybe, or the universe that had led her to that creek at exactly the right moment, or maybe just herself for having the courage to keep going when every instinct told her to give up. "For what?" Elias asked. "For choosing me, for choosing us, for making me believe I deserve to be chosen." "Always," Elias said simply. "Always and always." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. Inside the house, Clara could hear the children laughing at something, could hear Sarah calling them to dinner. Ordinary sounds, everyday sounds, the sounds of a life well lived. Clara Boone, who had once been Clara Voss, who before that had been just Clara, with no real home or family to speak of, smiled and rested her head on her husband's shoulder. She was home now, had been for years, would be for all the years to come. And that, she thought, was miracle enough for anyone. 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 Miracle enough for anyone.